Good morning. I'm Karen Donfried with GMF, and I am delighted to welcome all of you to this book event with Patrick Davies. As you know, GMF is an organization that's focused on transatlantic cooperation. And today we have a British friend who wants to help open American eyes to the peril he believes we Americans face from within our own borders. And I think that's a really interesting example of transatlantic cooperation. I want to give a very warm welcome to Patrick Davies. I know Patrick as an accomplished British diplomat who served as the UK's Deputy Ambassador to the United States from 2013 to 2018. I am delighted to welcome you, Patrick, to GMF's virtual stage as a book author. And here is my very own copy of The Great American Delusion. I want to encourage all of you to purchase Patrick's book. I actually ordered it over Amazon and it came in record time. So if you're sitting in DC, you could order it right now. It'll be here for the weekend and we're supposed to have rain. So I think it's a great time to sit down with The Great American Delusion. I want to say that I found the book extremely readable. I thought that Patrick did a fantastic job of weaving the extremely serious argument he makes about American decline, including sobering data, with a really engaging and illuminating set of personal experiences from his time in the United States. Just to give you one example, at one point he's talking about the role of money in American politics, and he gives you the statistics and data about that, and then weaves in the meeting he had with Sheldon Adelson, who's been a particularly large donor to the Republican Party in American politics. So it's highly readable, and again, encourage you all to buy the book. Patrick's relationship to the United States, I have known him through his role as one of Britain's most senior diplomats. And I think a lot of people on this call probably are part of the Patrick Davies fan club from when he was Deputy Ambassador here in Washington. But what I hadn't fully appreciated is that his relationship to the United States started back in 1987, when he won an English-speaking Union student exchange scholarship that brought him to the United States to spend a semester at a small private high school in Pebble Beach, California. So really, he has had a decades-long relationship with us, with America and with Americans. Patrick, in your book, and I'm going to quote here, you say your book is a call to fight the enemy within, for America to fix itself so it can continue to thrive. Only by addressing the growing systemic problems concealed by its national nibs will the U.S. be able to maintain its political stability, secure its continued economic success, and retain its position as the world's leading superpower. And only then will America continue to be seen as a beacon for others aspiring for democratic freedoms and values, which is so essential for the future of the Western system. So really, in the book, you're making the case that the Great American Delusion is how many Americans fail to see where our own country is headed. So Patrick, now that I've given that overview of the book, I'd love to have you walk us through your main arguments. So over to you.
Karen, thank you so much. And the first thing I would like to say is a huge thank you to you for inviting me to part of your book event series, and to your colleagues who are hidden behind their cameras here, just for doing all the arrangements to make this happen across the Atlantic, from your office in Washington, DC, to my caravan in Northern England here, my caravan office. And it appears to be beautiful days on both sides of the Atlantic, which is great. And thank you also for the very generous introduction about both myself and the book. So, I mean, to turn to the book and to answer your question, I think, America's national myths are widely known. I mean, America has such reach across the world, and its culture and history is so well known that the national myths themselves about America are not a surprise, and they won't be any surprise to anybody dialing into this event today. But there are things like, as you referred to, America being the Western democracy to which other countries around the world, hoping for greater freedom and prosperity, the country to which they have traditionally aspired. It's the American dream. It's about how America has this image of being, for anybody being able to succeed in the US as long as they work hard and put their mind to it. It's about America's incredibly successful economy. I mean, still the richest economy on the planet. There's no disputing that. China rapidly rising, but not yet to the levels of the US. And how America has done that, and how we could all learn from that too. The myths are also about America's successful melting pot, and how the concept that people can come from anywhere in the world and they can help build the country and share in its success. And there's others around America's approach to free speech, which is probably more purist than many other Western democracies, and how that's contributed to a vibrant media environment that's seen to underpin the American democratic system. There are many more, of course. So, if these are well known, why did I write? Well, you talk about sort of my experience of the US dating back since the 1980s and my student exchange. So, I've been interacting with the US for more than 30 years. And I think when I first came to the US, I mean, I was in my late teens. I was enamored by the US, like many teenagers in Europe are and were. And, I think I was taken in then by, this mythology was true. As you said, I ended up in Pebble Beach, California, hardly representative of the whole of the United States, I think it's fair to say now. I realize that. But at the time, I was a kid coming and experiencing this amazing time I had, and was taken in by the mythology too. But over time, I think the more I got to know the US, the longer I spent working with Americans, and then 5 years recently in the country, the more it became clear that sort of the American approach to their national myths is a bit different, in my view, to other countries, to the point where, American mythology is just embedded in American culture. It's in your country music, it's in your movies, it's on your TV, it's in your sport, it's even in the sermons of evangelical preachers, and of course it's embedded deeply in politics. I mean, politicians, from whether Republican or Democrat, sort of draw from the sort of American exceptionalism mythology all the time when they're campaigning for office, when they're pushing certain policies. It's just what happens. And what I started to become concerned about was the level to which that meant people were believing the myths, to the point where they underplayed or overlooked problems that exist in America, like they exist in many other countries, but had been growing for decades. And so those issues weren't being addressed. And so what I set out to do in the Great American Delusion, and I have to say that title came very late in the process, indeed towards the very end, was to try to look at those myths in turn, consider how far they were held by the American people, but also then to look at how closely they reflected reality in America in the earlier 21st century. And what I found is, and you referred to this, is that quite often those myths are seen as fact, or seen as true, and considered so by many. And I did conclude that that was contributing to the fact that America has failed to sort of address some quite serious, fundamental political, social, and economic problems. And I think that has increased division in American society. I think it's helped fuel the partisanship that we see in US politics. And ultimately, as you said, I think it risks fueling America's decline. And so, you know, from my perspective of somebody who has deep affection for the United States and it's been such an important part of my both personal and working life, that's not good for the US. And when it's not good for the US, to be frank, given America's position in the world, it's bad for the rest of us too. So there's a lot of self-interest here from my perspective. And I think what's interesting is I think the Donald Trump phenomenon was the first manifestation, if you like, the first political manifestation of this myth blindness, that because the US has failed to tackle some of these deep underlining problems like inequality and systemic racism, and, you know, the fact that the American dream isn't really true for very many Americans now, the fact that those issues had failed to be tackled created an environment when, to be frank, a sort of brash, inexperienced narcissist could get elected to the very highest office because he could make simplistic promises, populist promises around make America great again, play on people's fears, and gain support from an American electorate who are frustrated that they feel that the system is no longer delivering for them as individuals in the way that they'd like it to do. So, you know, Trump, from my perspective, was a symptom, not a cause of the problem. And that's really important because, you know, his defeat in the election last November won't alone solve the problems that I think America faces. But I do think there's a risk that both people in the US and indeed we looking from the outside at the moment conclude that, you know, America is back, and indeed that's part of the Biden narrative. And there is a lot of truth in that, don't get me wrong. I don't want to underplay how important the shift is from the Trump to the Biden administration from an outside perspective. But that alone is not going to solve the problems I think America faces. And if we conclude that it does, then we just stack up more problems for the future. You know, I'll wrap up very soon because we should have time for questions. But I think, you know, it's fair to say here, this is not just an American phenomenon, far from it. You know, if you look at what has happened in the UK over the last 5 to 10 years, if you look at the sort of rise in populism here, the narrative around Brexit, it was a very similar trend that we've seen in America. It's that sense of cozy exceptionalism, that we are sometimes better than others and we can manage on our own. And, you know, that led us to Brexit, which is going to have profound and damaging consequences, in my view, for this country for many years to come. But there is a big difference in that the UK can do that, and that's bad for us, and it's very sad from my perspective. But if America gets this wrong, the implications aren't just for the US. The implications are for the rest of the world, and particularly for your Western allies, because, you know, it will see America's declining more quickly than it should, in my view. It will see Americans more consumed by crises at home and less able to engage in the world than we as Western allies would like. It will see the draw of the US model for those looking for greater freedom and prosperity declines. America's soft power will not be what it was. And, you know, and all that together emboldens our enemies. It emboldens, you know, Russia, it emboldens China, who will see a weaker and distracted America, less likely to push back against their malign activities, which impact for the whole of the West. So, you know, in the rapidly changing world we live in, I think that it's all the more important that we see America back. We see America being strong, stable, and successful at home, so it can play that role on the world stage that's so vital to the future of the Western system. I'll stop there. We can get into all sorts of details, I'm sure, but you know, I think this is not just about the US from my perspective. Of course, it's a book largely about the US, but it's about the impact of what happens to America on the rest of the world. And that's why, you know, I've had people say to me, well, why haven't you written all this about Brexit? Look at the state of your own country. Well, that's absolutely true. But as I said, what happens in the UK, while damaging here and will have a ripple around Europe and across the world because of Britain's role, but it's not to the same degree as the US, because we're not the world superpower anymore. And so what happens to the US is vital for the future for the rest of us. And so that's why I was driven to write, I think.
Thanks so much, Patrick. I think that gives everyone listening a wonderful sense of the richness of the arguments you're making in the book. And I would encourage everyone who's listening to use the question and answer function to send in questions, because I absolutely will weave in questions from all of you into this discussion with Patrick. Patrick, there are several points I want to draw you out on that you just made. But there was one thing that struck me right when I started reading the book that I underlined in the beginning of the book. And then as I read the argument, that point came up again because it's the last sentence of the book. You say, the Great American Delusion must end before it's too late. And at the beginning of the book, you said, I'm writing this book now because I want to be part of what's going to drive change in the United States. I want to ring the alarm bell before it's too late. And I want you to help me understand, how do we know when it's too late?
Yeah. The problem is with, how do we know when it's too late is we'll only know it's too late when it's too late, I guess. That's why I think there's no time to lose. So, I mean, the point, just to tease out that point a little bit more, I think what I'm trying to say is, the world is changing very quickly. That change seems to accelerate every year, every decade. The world is in many ways unrecognizable to it was even 10 years ago. So, if you look at how quickly China has risen and the wealth it has built, it's not that long ago that really America had no significant competitors, certainly from 1989 onwards. For a number of decades, there wasn't really a significant competitor to the US, and the US actually alone could operate in a number of theaters around the world. And yes, it brought on allies because there's great comfort in bringing on allies and you bring in other expertise, but actually America could have done what it wanted or needed to do on its own. That's not the case anymore. It's just not the case. I mean, India is rising rapidly too, not to quite the same level as China, but it's still emerging as a great power in the world. You've got old empires like Russia emboldened under Vladimir Putin, who are causing all sorts of challenges on their periphery and challenging the Western way. So the world has moved on. It continues to move on. That will happen increasingly quickly. And so, if America can't tackle these fundamental problems at home, so it can continue to be this strong, successful beacon of the Western system, and there, I do believe that system will be increasingly challenged, and that isn't good for the US, and it certainly isn't good for the rest of us in the Western world who are not protected by two great oceans from other countries right in our neighborhood. So I think that's the point. But I can't tell you when it will be. But I don't think there's a reason to delay. And of course, Joe Biden at the moment, understandably, has COVID to deal with. He's got the economic impact of COVID to try and rebuild the American economy. And of course, that's got to be first. Of course, that's got to be the priority, and it should. But, I don't think these wider issues that I talk about in the book about inequality and systemic racism and, the fact that social mobility in the US is now declining and less than Britain and Germany and Spain and so on. Those sorts of things need to be addressed by a broader program of policy reform so America can maintain its position as that global superpower.
And Patrick, I thought you were very eloquent, just now talking about the book, and earlier when I was reading the book, in explaining why you wanted to focus this book on the United States and not Britain. And you're not saying that everything's great in the UK. You're saying, no, we've had our own experience with these same challenges. And you could broaden that and say that we see this same evolution in France. I mean, you see Macron versus Le Pen, or even in Sweden with this rise of the Sweden Democrats. And so, we could argue that this isn't just a crisis for the United States, but there's a broader crisis of liberal democracy.
Yeah.
And of course, GMF focuses so much on transatlantic cooperation. You've spent a good chunk of your career on this as well. Are there opportunities for transatlantic cooperation or learning on this? I mean, if we think about, to your point about migration, can we learn things from each other about how to build more inclusive societies? Or are there lessons about workforce development and the future of work? Because you're very clear in the book that Americans have to solve this for our own society. And I take that point, but I'm curious if you see opportunities for transatlantic cooperation or learning as we try to manage these challenges.
Yeah, no, I definitely do. And indeed, one of the things I talk about in the book was how we would spend time in the embassy in Washington and our network of consulates around the US, trying to learn from what America had done. In particular, the thing I talk about is how America has, in certain parts of the country, been this great hotbed of innovation and develop these world-leading companies. And the obvious one is, of course, it's Silicon Valley and all the big tech companies. But it's not just Silicon Valley. It's Boston around MIT and Harvard and the great medical technological developments that come out of that region. It's Austin, Texas. It's Raleigh and so on. There are lots of pockets of this around the US, and we would go about, and indeed ministers and officials would travel from the UK to learn from the US about how you did it and how did you create the environment where these sort of industries could thrive, so we can learn from that. And indeed, the US, Britain has traditionally been ahead in the US of the digitization of government, which reduce costs, if it's done well, reduce costs, allows greater access and efficiency and so on. And so, our body government that was digitizing the UK government system worked very closely with your service, the service set up by Obama, to share expertise there. So there's absolutely in all these areas opportunities to learn. And in fact, we should actively go out and seek those, because no country, even a country as big and diverse as the US, has all the answers. Individual countries will develop different concepts. Some will work and some will not. So we really do. And as you say, that Europe in many ways is affected by the same trends as we've seen in the US, maybe on a smaller scale because we're smaller, less wealthy countries, but they are the same trends that are threatening liberal democracy. And so the more we can work together to learn from each other, the better, from my perspective.
And Patrick, you also had mentioned earlier that there has been a change in terms of an election that resulted in Joe Biden becoming US president. And in the book, you talk about the fact, or you ask the question, if the coronavirus pandemic could be a wake-up call for America. And surely the pandemic played a role in Donald Trump's defeat. But I want to draw you out on this as well, because obviously some things have changed since you wrote the book, not only the election of Biden, but we also saw this assault on the US Capitol on January 6th. And I'm curious what you think is changing, and does that affect at all the argument that you made in the book?
I genuinely don't think it fundamentally changes the argument I make in the book, because I think what we've seen in those developments is a reflection of the the trends that I describe. I mean, I would say, and this is almost certainly giving away my politics, but I would say that the shift to the Biden administration is a huge positive, not just for America from my perspective, but for the rest of the world. And the way that Biden has led his administration already to re-engage on the world stage, using the term America is back, as I said earlier, but rejoining the Paris Climate Accords, working with allies to see what we can do about the Iran issue, to seeking a re-election to the Human Rights Council, which is far from perfect, but it is the global forum where we can raise human rights concerns. And it's better to have America inside that than outside of it, from my perspective. So all that is undoubtedly positive. The trends there are moving in the right direction. On the political side, with the storming of the Capitol, I mean, not only was that shocking to watch from over here, and all the more so in the US, I'm sure. I think what that did for me was underline what I highlight in the book about the failings of the American political system, which have been building for decades, in my view. This is not a recent phenomenon. The fact that the Supreme Court rulings on Citizens United and SpeechNow.org against the Federal Election Committee that about 10, 15 years ago now, which basically opened up the political space to unlimited amounts of money, has perverted American politics in a really dangerous way. And I think, the reason I mention that, because I think that does play into the storming of the Capitol building, because I do feel that, from my perspective, Americans no longer necessarily feel the political system represents them. And I don't think that's just Republicans or Trump supporters. That's on both sides of the political spectrum. And it's because, in part, increasing amounts of money from single interest lobby organizations, from multi-billionaires. You mentioned Sheldon Adelson, the sort of casino tycoon who was a massive donor. Those distort your politics. I mean, the figures, and you will have read this in the book, or some of these, but the figures are shocking. I mean, really shocking for anybody looking from the outside world. So without going into this in huge detail, but the 2016 election, because these are the latest confirmed figures, if you like, $6.4 billion was spent in the presidential election, and the congressional elections too. That's 80 times more than the UK spent on a general election in 2015. Now, the US is 5 times bigger than the US, and it's a bigger space. So, okay, you can throw in some extra money for the travel that's required for candidates to move around a continent rather than a small country, but 80 times more. And if you look at the preliminary figures for 2020, the numbers are 14 billion in the US. That's 175 times more than an election in the UK. Now, there's something disturbingly distorting about that level of money in politics, where the people have that vast wealth, are able to both influence who is going to get elected, but also then hold them to account on what policy decisions they make, because they want them to be in their interests rather than the American voter. I think that's all feeding into this environment that leads to the storming of the Capitol building, because people don't trust the politics anymore. They don't trust the system. And so there's a lot I think America needs to do in that space. And I saw somebody on the chat saying, what's the first thing that America needs to do? And I think once Joe Biden has started tackling COVID and got that on track, and is rebuilding the economy, these political reforms are essential if America is to get back to some form of stable, well-functioning democratic system, because the system at the moment is distorted beyond recognition, I think. And the challenge, of course, is those reforms are really quite hard to do, because any attempt at changing sort of the ability of people to spend money in American politics is going to be taken all the way to the Supreme Court every step of the way. And so it'll be very slow, but it doesn't mean America shouldn't start, because without it, I think, you know, it will have implications for the future. And we've had one Donald Trump, and, you know, from my perspective, I don't think Donald Trump needs another one. But unless the political environment changes, there is a risk that you get that sort of phenomenon again.
So I think you have just responded to a couple of the questions. We had Mary Voigt asking, please list the specific tasks you think need to happen immediately in addition to increased civic participation. And it sounds like this issue of money in politics and political reform is what you're putting at the top of the list. And then Noel Creehane was asking, which one of the American national myths would you suggest needs to be addressed first? Is it the sense of exceptionalism, or are there other crucial elements that need to be debunked first? And I think you were just speaking to that as well, but if you want to say a little bit more, please do.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very easy thing to say and could be seen as quite offensive thing to say from an outsider, I guess. But I think it is that sense of exceptionalism that America just needs to think about again. I mean, there's no question that America is exceptional in many ways. I mean, it's you're an incredibly successful country. You are the world's superpower. You're still the world's biggest economy. You have these companies that have innovated well beyond what many other companies could ever dream about, and been incredibly successful. So there's all sorts of things about the American system that are, and I talk about this in the book as well, the positives of the dynamism of American society, the work ethic, the ability to try and fail and bounce back, which, certainly here in the UK, we're trying to move the country to that sort of approach. But, there's still a sense here that, if you fail, can you get back up again? Which is very different in the US. So all those are positives, but at the same time, I think I talk about in the book a sort of a shift from sort of that person-centered approach in the US to one of more of community, a sense of, yes, that there are huge strengths in America and incredible success, but actually that isn't static. That isn't, you can't look back 20, 30, 50 years and say, America led the world to defeat Nazism by coming into the World War II in 1941, et cetera, and then the economy booming, et cetera. You can't stay there and say, look at how wonderful we were, and continue to believe that's the case when the world changes around you. So it's dare I say it, a little bit more humility to say, actually, we've got some serious problems too, and we need to address those. And those are fundamental to us retaining our position as the global superpower and the sort of leader of the Western world, which are so important to all of us. So I think that, and in the sort of, I have three baskets of things I think the US needs to do in the book. And the first basket, and is by far the most difficult, is some constitutional change, because I think in some ways the Constitution is no longer fit for purpose in the 21st century, although it's been an incredibly enduring document and very important. And those are things around, I genuinely believe the Electoral College needs to be reformed, because it's increasingly distorting the most important election in the US. This time round, the candidate who won the general vote won the presidency, but that's not happening that frequently anymore, and that doesn't feel very democratic. Now, that's really hard to do. I also think the frequency of elections to the House every 2 years is crazy. It's ridiculously expensive, and people are just getting their feet under the desk and then they're moving on. I think there's something around that. And I also think, and I talk about this also in the book, I think there's something around, and this is partly a reflection of how polarized American society has got, but how politicized appointments to senior judicial positions are now, and that's in the Constitution. The president has the right to nominate, and I think there's something around that should be changed, because it feels very odd to me that those critical roles for the union of the US are made on the back of politics rather than an independent process to find who's right for the job. So, but that's at the very, very hard end of change, because passing the threshold of 2/3 in the House and Senate, and then 2/3 of the states to make changes is going to be extremely hard to do, particularly in the environment we're in. But then there's a basket of political reform, which I've partly talked about in terms of the money in politics, but there's also gerrymandering, which is pretty widespread and could be resolved by establishing some form of independent body to oversee redistricting on a regular basis. Again, not that easy to do, but it's easier than constitutional change. And then you get into a whole list of social and economic policy change, which is not straightforward to do necessarily, and particularly in a very divided country, but is more in the realm of the possible. And those are things like tackling inequality. It's about facing head-on systemic racism. It's about investing in schools, where at the moment it can be a bit of a lottery. Where you live depends whether you get a good school or not, unless you can afford the private system. It's about investing in infrastructure again, to rebuild Americans' creaking infrastructure, its airports and its roads and all those sorts of things, and the infrastructure, of course, of the digital age too. It's a long list, but it's a list that's more achievable in my view. And I think why that's important is because if American political leaders, Biden and Harris now, can start to show genuine change for American voters, that will help to rebuild faith in the political system. And then that may give space for those political reforms to be made that can reinforce that faith in the system, if you see what I mean. So, I think it's really important for those policy changes that can take place more easily for them to start delivering. I mean, I heard somebody say, recently that, how do you bring America back together again when it's so divided? And it's things like, if you can do something with healthcare in the US, particularly after you're coming out of a health pandemic, a global pandemic, that people on both sides of the political spectrum can say, actually, I'm benefiting, my family, we benefited from this change, then you help to rebuild faith in the system as well. That gives you greater space to do other things. So it is crucially about delivery, and what we've seen over the last few years, and certainly in the Obama presidency and before, is the gridlock in Washington really stopping things happening, and it's breaking through that to start delivering that I think is the first step to sort of renewal, if you like.
Actually, that answer, I think, also spoke to a question that came in from Philipp Ackermann, who was your German counterpart when you were here in DC, because Philipp was asking about this polarization and social divide that needs to be overcome, and his sense that the rhetoric that President Biden is using of uniting America just isn't strong enough to really help bring together this country. But what I heard you just saying is you can have that rhetoric, but the solution comes in concrete policy change, like in the area of health care and health insurance. So I mean, you may want to say more about that, but I also want to draw you out on questions that came from two listeners that I think are connected. The Portuguese ambassador is listening, Ambassador Vital, and he says, history tells us that all superpowers needed to believe they were in a way exceptional. Is the fact that people are now disputing American exceptionalism a reflection of a world that's becoming less American-centered and more multipolar? And that really connects to a question from Julie Wormser saying, please say more about how the US is seen post-Trump. Untrustworthy? A concern that will continue to seesaw politically? And she was saying, could you compare what's happening in the US with the decline of Great Britain as a global superpower? So the sense of how is the US seen from the outside, and what does that tell us about this age of American power? Back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Those are three great questions. So the first question from Philip Ackerman, I think I agree with him. I think the unity narrative on its own is not enough. It's and this is partly jumping to the third question now, but from in a UK example, as you will know, and many of those dialing in will know, there's been a lot of talk post-Brexit of global Britain. It's the UK new brand, if you like. We are re-engaging in on the global stage as an independent nation, no longer part of the EU. And I have no problem with the concept at all. I think, you know, it's a reasonable concept given what Britain chose to do politically. But it ultimately comes down to delivery. So, you know, there is very little value in Britain saying we are global Britain, free to engage around the world and do whatever, unless you come behind that and you deliver something, and you actually do something. And if you are poorer and weaker, as I fear Britain will be as a result of Brexit, then you have less space to bring that delivery behind you. And so you've created a rather negative cycle for yourself. So, you know, why I mention that is because as I say, I think a unity narrative from the Biden administration is really important given the divisions we've seen in America, and the right thing to say, but people will only believe that when they see the administration delivering something for all Americans on both sides of the political spectrum. And that might be healthcare, it might be reinvesting in infrastructure that people see the benefits, it might be reinvesting in schools and so on. It might be, you know, beginning the long and difficult task of rooting out systemic racism and making changes in the policing and so on, where people can see genuine results. That's how people will measure both the Biden administration and indeed the Boris Johnson administration here in the UK. Turning to the Portuguese ambassador, and, you know, is this a sign of the world being less US centric and multipolar? I think the answer to that is yes, to a degree, in that, you know, it may be when we look back in decades to come, we've seen the peak of American influence. Maybe. It's hard to know whether that is the case at the moment, but, you know, I think what I'm arguing in the book is, and what I'm trying to argue in the book is that, you know, all empires come and go in history. We've seen it from the Greeks, the Romans, the Brits, and so on. So, you know, that's probably inevitable because the world changes. It doesn't stay static, as I said before. But it's how America responds to that challenge, and whether America takes the actions that it can take to shore up its position, remain that incredibly successful and powerful country, so important to the rest of the Western world, for as long as possible. And actually to, you know, when the world does change, when China rises and becomes the richest economy on the planet, and overtakes the US, and there, you know, and with that political dynamics will shift. But America is still in a strong, stable, wealthy, secure place that it can be an important player on the world stage and a counterbalance to different trends we see elsewhere. So it's, you know, this is not about stopping the developments of history, but it's about maintaining America's position for as long as possible and emerging through that transition in a positive way. And the final question about how is the US seen post-Trump? It's a very good question, and I hope what's clear in the book and what I've been saying today is I have a huge affection for the US, and it's been so important to me over my career and my personal experiences that, maybe I see the US through slightly rose-tinted glasses too. Maybe I have a slight case of American exceptionalism mythology too. So, I don't think America has been as damaged as some people are speculating. I mean, I do think, if you're sitting in a country, let's say, in the neighborhood of China or Russia, and you were leaning towards, you're looking at how your country transitions out of autocracy, let's say, towards a more democratic system, I think some of the choices you have to make now are a bit different because of what's been happening in the US. But I don't think that's to the point of, we've seen some commentators that, people won't have trust in America anymore. They won't have faith in America anymore. They think it's, that's gone. I don't think it's that extreme, because we're already seeing the new administration engage back on the world stage in a way that's very familiar. At the same time, that needs to continue over a number of years, I think, to rebuild confidence in many places. And again, I think, in somewhere like the UK, somewhere firmly in the sphere of the Western world, we're less affected in some ways by that shift in America. It's those more on the periphery who've got those more difficult decisions to make that might be looking at the US and scratching their heads a little bit. But I don't think it's all lost, far from it. I think, America has the chance to re-emerge. I think the Biden administration is on the right track. What I worry about slightly is that, a 4-year administration, 8-year administration, whatever it might be, is not very long. The American system is very slow because of the checks and balances built into that system. And so, whether he will be able to make the changes necessary to get the US back on track remains to be seen. But at least it's now pointing in the right direction. If it was another 4 years of Donald Trump, well, all bets would be off, I'm afraid.
So we have a question from Sandy Vershbow that follows very nicely on what you just said. Sandy also sending you congratulations, Patrick, on the book. But here's the question. He says, Biden needs support from Europe, economically, politically, and militarily, if he is to succeed in reestablishing US leadership and restoring America's power of example. Yet, Europeans may be tempted to hedge their bets in case Trump or a Trump clone returns to power in 2024. In this regard, how worried are you about France's campaign for European strategic autonomy as the goal for European defense, rather than strengthening the European pillar of NATO?
It's a good, I'm not convinced necessarily that European nations will hedge their bets, actually. I think the vast majority of European nations will want the Biden administration to be successful. It will want to open its arms and welcome the US back onto the global stage and hug America very closely to ward off the challenges of another Trump emerging and trying to distance themselves a bit again. So I think it would be, it would not be in Europe's interest to say, oh no, you might say you're back, but back off a little bit because we've seen what you've done before. I mean, then we're just going to turn, the America away from Europe in a way that's unhelpful. So I think we will be, Europe will look at welcoming the US back with open arms. And on the specific point about sort of European strategic independence, I think there's a way that this can develop that actually reinforces the transatlantic alliance. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. Well before Donald Trump was pushing Europeans to spend more on their defense in NATO and up the percentage of their GDPs that they spend on defense, and so they make a fuller contribution. This was a you know, an Obama policy too. I mean, Obama did it a little bit more quietly and a little bit more subtly, but it was the same policy of the US saying, no, you know, come on, Europe, you need to do a bit more now. You're wealthy, stable democracies. It's time for you to pay your share. So I don't think that's going to change. And as I say, as long as the continued development of that European defence stays firmly connected to NATO and its aims and aspirations, then I don't see why it would have to be a negative. I mean, and to be frank, certainly from my perspective, the chance of Europe developing a completely autonomous defence operation is highly, highly unlikely, just because the amount of investment that would take, the skill gaps and equipment gaps that would need to be filled, that's not going to happen anytime soon. But actually strengthening European capability, definitely. And I think America would welcome that, not see it as a threat to them or NATO.
Super, thanks. We have a couple of questions that get at this issue of the US as a beacon of democracy for others in the world. And there are several of them, and I'm just going to try to pull them together. You know, the argument there is, on the one hand, the US needs to heal itself, but on the other hand, there are things happening around the world. One of the examples in one of the questions is the what is called a coup in Burma or Myanmar, and the US reaction to that. Another is what's happening in Poland and Hungary. And how do you answer this question of the tension of focusing on healing our own country versus standing up for values we believe in and around the world? And this also connects to President Biden's idea of a summit for democracy. How can the US both walk and chew gum, to use an Americanism, at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I think America can walk and chew gum at the same time. Where it becomes a problem, I was trying to think of a way of how I develop that metaphor. I'll give that up. But where this becomes a problem is, so let me start again. From my perspective, America can do those two things. America has done those two things for decades. It's not new. It didn't do it during the Trump presidency, clearly, but before and now we're already seeing after, with the new administration, that the administration is speaking out about what's happening in Burma. It is speaking out about anti-democratic developments in other parts of the world. It is starting to re-engage on the Iran issue and the Iran nuclear question and so on. So while at the same time, the Biden administration is extremely busy handling the COVID crisis, trying to get that back on track and trying to get vaccination programs running as quickly and as smoothly as possible, and soon to rebuild the economy as we emerge from the pandemic. So that's not impossible. I think what's more important is, if you like, is the symbolism that comes out of America. It's that soft power. It's when people look to America, they look to the West, and they're attracted by the freedoms that we have, the democracies we have, the prosperity that we have compared to their own countries. It's ensuring that when people look to us, that they look positively and say, actually, okay, let's hope Trump was an aberration, but fundamentally speaking, we still see value in that system of government. We see value in the Western way of life, and we will move in that direction rather than being pulled somewhere else. So that by tackling the problems at home and delivering for Americans, I think you create an environment where the world can see that things are on the up, things are improving again in the US, and it's proved that the system works. That actually, if we talk about Trump, America survived a challenge to the system, if you like, and re-emerged stronger. So it's, in a way, it's what happens over the next few years that's going to be critical to this. Is America going to rebuild itself and heal the divisions inside the country and tackle the problems it faces? So when people look in, they say, "Ah, yeah, okay, this is what we want to move towards." Or is America going to slip further down the slope and see those divisions rise and tensions rise and inequalities rise? And then people will say, this is not a model to which we should be aspiring, and we've got other models tapping on our shoulder, whether it be China or Russia, and actually this feels a little bit more comfortable. So I don't think America necessarily needs to do something major on the world stage to prove that it's back and to prove that it's something to which other countries should aspire. It's actually sorting itself out at home. So we don't see another Trump, and then we don't see another storming of the Capitol, that people will say, okay, that's actually something that is worth looking towards as a model.
I think that's a great note to end on, Patrick. And certainly that is the challenge of our time, that, the United States, the message of the United States is not that we're the perfect democracy or that we have it all figured out. It's that democracy is always a work in progress. And that if we Americans can succeed in making our democracy stronger and reaching out to the 74 million Americans who voted to give Donald Trump a second term because they feel ill-served by this system, then that will be a really powerful statement for the rest of the world as well. And Patrick, I do think there's nothing like having a good friend look at someone else's situation and give them the best candid advice that they can. And I think that's what you've done in this book. And I certainly learned a lot from reading it. And I'm grateful to you for taking the time to walk all of us through the arguments in your book. To everybody who tuned in this morning, thank you for the fantastic questions. I apologize that I did not get to all of them, but I am grateful to all of you who sent them in. And please join me in thanking Patrick virtually. But the best thanks you can give is ordering his book and reading it. So I encourage everyone to do that. And Patrick, I hope this was a good experience for you, because we'll look forward to your next book. But Patrick, many thanks.
Well, thank you, Karen. It was a fantastic discussion, and it's great to see you and be reconnected to GMF again. And let's hope that before too long we can all get together physically rather than virtually and do this again. That would be fantastic.
I think that is something we can all toast to. Absolutely. Thanks so much. And bye-bye to everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.